Okay, I think we're up and running. So good morning, everyone. It is so great to have you all joining us for another year of KAS dealer training. The last one went by so fast, it's hard to believe we're starting another year. While the majority of this group is the same, we are really excited to have some new faces here too. So whether this is your first year or your 8th year, welcome. We hope you find it to be a valuable part of the program throughout the year. So yeah, glad to have you. Before we get started on our main topics for the morning, I will go over some brief announcements here quickly. First of all, you should have received a February dealer mailing. There's lots of important info in that, so be sure to read that over. In that packet, revised spring price sheets were included, so most of those asks are now filled in, which is great. But I do want to mention a little hiccup error on our part. When the files were merged together, the dealer inoculant page was merged to the retail price sheet. So we sent a constant contact out to notify you of those who have email, but we are also sending a hard copy out. So if you haven't received that yet, just keep an eye on it. I want to highlight that just so we can prevent any issues there. So apologize for the inconvenience. When you get that new page, rip the old one off, throw that away, and staple the new one on. I also wanted to give you a reminder on the early pickup program. During the second half of February, we're offering $3 per bag pickup credit, which is an increase of 50 cents per bag from our typical pickup credit. So if it makes sense for you to take out product early, we'd encourage you to do that and save some money in the process. So I think that's all I have for announcements here this morning. So with that, I'm going to introduce our training topic and speakers for the morning. After our Soil Health College in December, we were reading through our surveys from you guys with feedback. And several of you mentioned that you learned a lot from the classroom event that we held, but it'd be really great to have some more practical applications on cover crops and soil health. So that's what we're going to do this morning. We have Rod Porter and Leland Miller from the North and David Hunsberger from Central. They are prepared to talk about some of their personal experiences on their own farms, as well as discuss how to make decisions on crop rotations, selecting the right cover crops, and so much more. So with that, I'm going to turn the call over to Rod. He's going to lead us off and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Okay, good morning. Let me hopefully everybody's able to see my screen. So good morning. Yeah, I think we received quite a few positive reviews on the Soil Health College that we did back in December, and asking maybe for some follow-up on how to really incorporate cover crops into our customers' cropping system. So I want to review just a couple things and then some suggestions on how you can work with producers and incorporate cover crops. So the review side, of course, when you're considering a cover crop, you have to consider, what species fit into the climate and geography that you're in, and what fits in terms of, the time of year when you're going to plant a cover crop, when that cover crop needs to be done and move on to the next crop, how that all fits into a crop rotation. And that's mostly what I'm going to talk about this morning. But taking into consideration, what was the crop that you just grew and what crop is going to be grown next. And then what are you looking for out of a cover crop? There's obvious things like erosion control and building organic matter, but what all purpose could a cover crop serve? So that all needs to be considered. So basically, to work with a cover crop, we need to find windows within our cropping system where we're not actively growing a cash crop or an important food source. And there are those sort of down times in the cropping cycle. And I would advocate that there's also strong potential for filling in those gaps with another producing crop that serves cover crop purposes. So to do this, we have to find those open windows. We might adjust our crops to create some wider windows. Often that's a hurdle that we hear is that, well, there's not enough time for that, or I don't have a place to fit it. So finding those windows and adjusting crops a little bit. Considering alternative crops that can help create better cover crop opportunities. Step outside the box a little bit. Potentially interseed cover crops into a cash crop, particularly corn, but others possible too. And then, when you're working with a producer, hopefully they have already seen the value of why they want to be considering cover crops and help them to set a plan that's reasonable for the farm. Another hurdle that we often hear is that, well, I can't cover all my acres, or, that would cost me too much to do all of that every year. Don't try to do all that. Do what's reasonable and what fits for the farm. So again, just a little review, but what are the services that we look for from a cover crop? This is, you heard this at the Cover Crop College. You probably have heard it in other places as well. But reducing erosion, reducing compaction, improving soil structure, producing biomass and building organic matter, conserving nutrients, sequestering carbon, helping to form more mycorrhizae relationships with roots in the soil, and reducing pest pressure. So let's compare that to crop rotations. So crop rotations recycle crop residues and nutrients, build carbon and organic matter, reduce weeds, insects, diseases, aid in nutrient management, increase yields, reduce fertilizer needs, create double crop possibilities, which keeps the soil covered, and improves soil health and biology. But don't they sound very similar? The services that we look for out of cover crops is the same sort of benefits that we see in a crop rotation. So at the end of the day, to produce good yields and good quality forages, soil health is a key component of that. And our crop rotations are really just an extension of a soil health program that we work with producers to formulate. So first, let's talk about adjusting crops a little bit. So Tom Kilser, many people know of, has done a fair amount of forage research, done quite a bit with double cropping of forages. And he had found that, there's no significant yield difference in corn hybrids that may be 5 to 10 days earlier than the typical maturity that you may grow, or the slightly later maturity that you grow because you think you need that for better yield. So he found that shortening the corn maturity by 5 days allowed triticale to be planted a week earlier, which resulted in higher yielding triticale and more annual forage yield that's better than later maturing corn with no triticale in the system. So, the triticale serves as a cover crop and a valuable forage crop. And just in general, if you would shorten maturity just a little bit, that could equal maybe a week to 2 weeks more time in the fall to establish a cover crop, to make some things possible that otherwise, without adjusting your maturity at all, might be difficult or not possible. So this is just adjusting maturities, particularly corn we're talking about here, but there could be other crops as well to adjust the maturities and create a wider window. So here's a product that has been gaining popularity up here in the north. Yield Max cocktail mix. It's a diverse mix that serves cover crop and forage purposes. This mix is not well suited to the southern area of Kings, but probably like I-80 and north. A combination of sorghum sedan grass with Italian ryegrass, clovers, and some hairy vetch. So fitting this into a system, So here's an example of a rotation, including the yield max. So in year one, you've grown corn silage. You shorten your maturity slightly, so you've got a triticale crop that you establish and harvest in the spring of the second year. Then you go right behind that and plant this yield max mix, which you could get 2 cuts and potentially 3, depending on the season and your exact location. Then in year 3, that can serve that overwinters, keeping the ground covered. In year 3 in the spring, you could potentially take the first cut off of that as a forage, or simply leave it and terminate it as a green manure, and then right back into corn silage again. So you've incorporated a valuable forage crop that serves a valuable cover crop benefit. And this yield max mix really improves the tilth of the soil. I've seen in a number of places how well it helps improve the tilth of the soil. And during this whole time, you didn't give up anything in terms of production, but did benefit soil health. Here's another Raised Crazy summer mix. I think most everybody knows of this mix. Diverse cover crop mix, but it can be used as a forage to graze or potentially cut. So again, if you've got a grazing farm, how do you incorporate this into their system to provide some rotation benefit and cover crop benefit? So example here, you've got the old pasture that it's time for it to come out. So in the following year in the spring, you graze it the first time with an early growth. You terminate that old pasture and you can no-till Raised Crazy summer mix right into that ground, graze that or potentially cut it in the summer, and come back in the fall, plant some cool season annuals. In this case, I'm suggesting Triticale Plus, but there's certainly other choices. The following spring and early summer, you can graze that or harvest it twice, and then go right back in and reestablish a new pasture seeding late in the summer of year 3. So again, we've not given up our important forage production, but we've incorporated diversity and a crop that has additional cover crop benefits. Here's just a very simple dairy rotation that incorporates, again, using forages as soil health improvement as well. So coming out of the hay stand, plant a year of corn silage, put your triticale in the fall, harvest that the following spring. Go into BMR Sudan grass for an alternative forage, which just has a much more fibrous and aggressive root system than corn, leaves the ground in nice shape. And then the following year, go back into corn silage, and maybe you interseed into that corn silage, and you'll hear about that next. Many of us are starting to work with more farms that are producing cash grains. So here's an example of a grain farm rotation where you can incorporate cover crop. So we're growing that corn for grain, interseeded with a cover crop potentially. The following year, we grow soybeans, and we keep those soybeans a little bit earlier maturity so that we have enough time to plant winter triticale for harvest the following summer as grain and straw. Grain makes an excellent feed grain, and triticale produces a lot of straw. That opens up a really nice window after that grain and harvest, straw harvest, to plant a diverse cover crop, maybe like maize pro or Raised Crazy fall mix. And after a small grain is the very best opportunity for a dedicated cover crop. You've got time for just about anything to grow and produce biomass and extensive roots, and there's many possibilities. So then after that summer cover crop with some overwintering species in it, terminate that the following spring and go back into corn. So we've incorporated a cover crop in this system, and we've not planted corn after corn. So that was kind of quick. But hopefully I've sparked some ideas in your head that there are, rather than looking at cover crop as a standalone thing, incorporating cover crop as part of the overall cropping system. And hopefully I've given you a few new ideas this morning. So, and I'll stop sharing screen, and I think pass it on to Leland.
Thanks, Rod. Yep.
Are you able to see my screen?
I can see you at this point. Your screen is not up.
Oh boy. Okay.
Go down to that arrow at the bottom. Share screen.
Yeah, I did that. Share screen. Ah, here we go. Well, you see it now?
Yep. You just make it full screen and then you should be good.
All right, we got it. Excellent. So can you hear me all right, Ashley?
Yep, you're coming through loud and clear. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Hey, thanks to everyone that's taken time to join us today. I'm sure there's a lot of things you'd like to be doing, and but I'm glad for your commitment to learning about cover crops and soil health. So hopefully I don't screw anything up too badly here, but before I talk about interseeding, I briefly want to touch on it. And as if you think about what Rod just shared about changing your life, because he wants to change your cover, your rotations. He wants you to be, not just going silage alfalfa as a way to introduce soil health. And until we really understand the value of it, it's going to be hard for us to make those changes to, in my talk here, I'm going to talk about interseeding, but, and so we have to figure out how we got here. And in short, we got here because we got some bad advice. And if you can read my screen, globally, our cropland is bare approximately 6 months out of the year. So that's a problem. And 43% of the erosion comes from wind and 57% comes from rain and runoff. So erosion is a real problem. We're at 4 to 5 tons per acre per year currently. So if you look at how we got here, basically we've had these two different paradigms. And on the one extreme, we have a soil that is alive and driven by nature. And on the other extreme, we have a soil that is merely a place to hold the plant. It's sand, silt, and clay, and it's driven by inputs. And in reality, we probably, since we're not hunter-gatherers, we're going to end up somewhere in between those extremes. And it's more of a continuum. But the point in interseeding and cover cropping and soil health is to move us further from that conventional heavy input towards nature. And like I said, we're not hunter-gatherers. We're not going to be growing trees out of rocks like is in my picture here. But you have to ask yourself, how did that tree grow out of that rock? And I don't have time to really dig into it, but in short, there's a lot more to the seed that was planted on that rock than meets the eye. And the other concept I want to make sure I briefly touch on is the fact that the green plant is the only producer on the planet. Everything else is a consumer. The green plant is the only thing that can take sunlight, energy, and produce the building blocks of life that everything else depends on. So in order to build soil health, we need to start with the green plant gleaning energy from the sun. And then it's going to feed the microbes in all their various forms. I just have a couple up here, and it's going to produce a whole lot more earthworms. And if you look at the center picture, there's these very fine hair-like hyphae that come from a mycorrhizal fungi, and they're attached to a root hair. So this is highly magnified. And in a healthy soil, in a cubic meter, there will be up to 12,000 miles. That's right, 12,000 miles of these fungal hyphae that are there working for the plant. And those hyphae are 10 times more efficient than the plant roots at getting nutrients. So it's a big deal to have a diverse cover crop and a diverse crop rotation to keep those guys working and alive. And then here on the far right, you see this little picture of the earthworms. This study was done by the USDA, and this was a simple cover crop of rye. And they tripled the population of earthworms with the simple cover crop of rye over several years' time, and went from 9.2 earthworms per cubic meter to 29.6. So that's just a little glimpse of why it's so important to have a diverse cover crop. And real quick, microbes that we want to feed need food, air, and water. And a bare soil is like an empty plate. A rye cover crop is like a bowl of spaghetti. Yes, you'll live, but not for long, and you won't have a high quality of life. And a diverse cover crop is a balanced diet. And the microbes also need housing. And so next time you're tempted to destroy their house, think about what your plow's doing. Anyway, that's my short. I wish I had an hour to talk about that, but here we go. Interseeding 2022, my first attempt at interseeding, and I must have got lucky. So we did on June 11th, when the corn was up about the 3 to 4 leaf stage. We came in with a no-till drill, and we removed the units, or I should say Rod removed the units and delivered this very, very adequate no-till drill to no-till cover crop into this corn. And so this was June 11th on this picture. Corn's 3 to 4 leaf high, and about 10, 11 days later, you can see we had good moisture, and the interseeding came up quite well. On the left is the 30-inch row, and on the picture on the right is a 60-inch row. And to me, it looks like I didn't have a high enough rate on the 60-inch row. That my stand could have been a little heavier there. And the other thing is, this drill did not quite exactly match my corn planter. Corn planter I had was a 6-row, and the drill was a 10-foot drill. So you'll see some skips there, but if I could have had a 3rd row in the middle, that would have been good on that 60-inch row. And then the rain stopped. And so this was a great year to see if interseeding steals from a yield in a dry year. And on the right again is a 60-inch row, and on the left is a 30-inch row. So that's July 16. And this is taken probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun and the corn is just feeling it, because we went for, I don't know, 2 months maybe without rain. A month and a half it was without any appreciable rain. And then July 23, I take another picture, and this is later in the day, so the corn looks a little better, but it's still dry. And you can see in the 60-inch row on the right, you got the buckwheat, you have cereal rye, cowpeas, sun hemp. It was more of a summer annual mix on that 60-inch row. And then on the left, I used the King's Broadcaster, which is a mix of annual ryegrass and 3 different kinds of clover and tillage radish. So it came up well. I was quite pleased with that. But here you can see, even though it's very dry, that cover crop is just kind of sitting there dormant in this 30-inch rows. You can see there's a lot more sun over here in the 60-inch rows, a lot more growth. So then on September 3, the farmer needed a little silage, so he harvested the outside rows. This was not part of the plot, but you can see that the radish is there and the ryegrass and there's some clover in there, and this broadcaster is leggy, obviously, because it's been shaded. However, it's still there. So this next picture on the right is what was harvested earlier, and then on the left, that was harvested roughly 2 weeks later. And the amount of growth is significant. To go back to what Rob was talking about, those days of cover crop growth in September are worth their weight in gold. And you can see there on the right where my dog's standing that you got nice growth, and that's only a week and a half since harvest. On the left, that has just been harvested, and you can see the tractor marks has done some damage to the cover crop. So let's go to the next picture. And here again on the left is September 30. It's like a week after harvest, and then November 6th, a month after harvest. Month and a week, month and a half. So you can see same spot in the field, how much that those tractor marks and kill, not really kill, but setting back that cover crop, the cover crop was still able to come through. And then on the right, there's actually both pictures, you can see the skip to the right there where the drill did not come all the way out. And so we had a skip there, which is good to see the difference between cover crop and no cover crop. This is a picture of the 60-inch rows. And the 60-inch rows, I wasn't terribly impressed with in terms of the amount of cover here. Partly because we put a summer annual in there, and partly because when he came through and harvested and chopped that corn silage, it just took it out. And the only thing I had left there was a little bit of cereal rye. So if you're going to do it for grazing, I think there's some application for 60-inch rows, but we'll get to the yields in a little bit and you'll see why I'm not super impressed. And then here's a picture taken December 17 with the snow. Good cover there. And January 21st, another picture. Primarily what you see there is the annual ryegrass. Very nice cover, still out there, protecting the soil. So yields, 30-inch rows, I had 33,600 population when I did this comparison, and 17.5 ton versus 20.7, with the lower yield actually being where there was no interseeding. I want to hasten to say that I'm not here to promote 3 ton more yield with interseeding. I'm here to promote that in a dry year, I did not see any sort of yield drag from the interseeding. And this work, or the work that Penn State has done, concurs with this. They've done it for years, and there is no yield drag with interseeding. So if you're concerned about that, don't be. Then here's where I compared with the Redtail 54T13 on a 30-inch row versus a 30 by 60. And here you see, you're over 6 tons. You went from 19.8 tons in a 30-inch row down to 13.5 in an alternating 30 and 60-inch row. And I will say that I believe those numbers. Now, the reason the population on this check was at 28.7 was due to the fact that that was as high as we could get the population with the planter gears that he had. So we jacked it up as high as we could. But when you have a 60-inch row, those kernels are coming in there pretty close together. And so that could have been part of why we saw that yield difference. But other work that has been done would concur that you're going to see a yield difference. But this was 32%. The other interseeding trial that I did was with the grain plot, and that corn was done, planted on the 7th of May, interseeded on the 15th of June. So this corn, I don't have a picture here of when it was actually interseeded, but instead of 3 or 4 leaf, it was more like 4 to 5 leaf. So I'm going to say a week to a week and a half later in maturity. And at least this year in these plots, there's no question that the earlier was better for earlier take of the interseeding. And the yields here, again, grain yields 156 bushels on the 30-inch rows, and we lost 26 bushels on the 60 by 30. And in this plot, we also did 60 by 60. So instead of alternating 60 and 30-inch rows, we just went 60, 60, 60 across the board. And it was clear that our yields went down with that. In this plot, we had the population of 32,000. So we compensated for the fact that we had a fewer, wider row spacing. Summary. Based on my experience this year and based on a lot more work that's been done at Penn State and other places, if you can get in that interseeding at 3 to 4 leaf, even in this far north, 2 to 3 leaf, it's a small price to pay for the year-round soil coverage. One of the things I hope to do this spring is get some biomass readings on that interseeding cover crop to see, what kind of nutrients did we capture, to try to put a dollar value on it. I believe that the drought conditions that actually both of these plots were grown in this year likely helped that interseeding, because the corn was shorter and more sun was getting down to the interseeded cover crop. The other comment I make, it's important to know what herbicide you're using. We used a very low rate of Resolve Q at a 1/2 ounce, and then had a couple burn downs in there. And if anyone on the call wants some more details and discuss it offline, I'd be delighted to talk to you. And the other thing I would add along with that, if there's anyone, particularly in my neck of the woods in New York State, or even northern Pennsylvania, that's interested in doing an interseeding trial, or you have a customer that's interested in doing that, I would be more than happy to work with you on that. Some ideas for next year. I'd like to try a shorter season hybrid. And like Rod already mentioned, there's a lot of energy to be gained from an earlier harvest. So try to look at what kind of yields we sacrifice on that shorter season silage to get a cover crop established after harvest earlier, whether interseeded and taking away the sun or the shade, or just coming in and planting a cover crop beginning of September. I think the upright leaf habit, I think there's something there, because some varieties are a lot more shade loving and shade giving, I should say. So that's something I want to look at with our different varieties. I want to try and mix without annual ryegrass, because I hear that annual ryegrass is going to be a pain to kill. So that's one thing I'm a little concerned about, but we'll figure it out. It seems like the idea is to not let it get away from you in the spring. I want to try interseeding if I can this year earlier, 2 to 3 leaf. I might even do something crazy and seed it right after planting the corn. I have some ideas on that. Then there's the short stature grain hybrid. I know there's grain hybrids out there that are getting shorter and shorter. So there's a way to reduce the shade and through the plant architecture and enhance your cover crop. The other thing, which is not specifically related to interseeding, is reducing the salts and the sides, the fungicides, the herbicides. And to that, you know, as I'm alluded to at the beginning, talking about how our mycorrhizae, our bacteria, particularly the fungi, are starting in an environment with the seed treatment that's designed to kill fungus. And so I'm very curious long term, you know, what are the implications of removing that, and how long will it take to actually get a healthy population of microbes. So I just ending this presentation with why cover crops? Well, photosynthesis. Photo means light, and synthesis means to put together. So cover crops are using light energy to produce life. And that's why we cover crop. That's what I have, Ashley.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Leland. We're gonna I'm gonna pull up David's slides and we will hear from him next.
Actually be helping me by sharing the screen for me. I need to be traveling this morning, so it's great to have you here today. I'll just share a little bit from my own farm experience here. I'm not near as professional as Rodney and Leland, but I'll tell you, my paradigm was broken, and that's what got me started on the soil health kick. I had been dairying for years on my home place. We used bedded pack, composted, we rototilled, hauled that out. We had a slurry store, and we were chasing the chopper with the drill. And you can see here, there's an illustration of a nice little cover crop here. This is cargo. And I was not happy with the results. My organic matters were staying in that 2.5%, 3%. Was listening to people talk about how things would go and how they gained great soil health by using cover crops, and I was doing it, and I was really frustrated. So I basically vented to my local NRCS person, and she encouraged me to do a little more digging. And so she gave me some information. Richard Mulvaney was very integral to my thought process. He's out of the University of Illinois. Also looked at the Moro plots out there. And I guess the way I would say it is that I was a little bit like, I had my wood stove or my coal stove, and I was shoveling in the fuel, but I never closed the flue. I never closed the door. I just kept on shoveling. And those of you who have already kept a fire recognize that if you do that, you're going to get very hot and you're going to use up a lot of fuel. And I think that's the best analogy that I could go with my own farm, what I was doing. And so Leland was saying, how long does it take to change? I think the changes can be fairly rapid. And I like the fact he was sharing about the sides. I decided to not use neonics several years ago. and saw a great change. Somebody wants to talk to me about that sometime. I can share anecdotally. We have a group of farmers that get together in our county and talk about opportunities, and the non-neonics, I think, has moved me out of a slug problem into a not having a problem with slugs, and I'd be willing to talk about that and confirm that. So the next slide, maybe we'll just keep moving on here. I was doing aggressive rotation, aggressive crop rotation, and still was not getting what I needed to do. I was getting cereals and with legumes. I was planting corn and chopping it. This here is actually a photograph of some sorghum Sudan that we were chopping. So we were doing a lot of different things, and we were not able to move the ball. But I think one of the things that really changed when I was reading with Mulvaney was I decided that I needed to reduce my total nitrogen applied. We were purchasing trailer load after trailer load of nitrogen, and I believe that I was basically I had my my soil microbes were hooked on the crack cocaine of extra nitrogen, and so all that organic matter that I was putting out there and all the root exudates that I was putting out there were being burned up by the extra nitrogen. Maybe we'll go to the next slide then, Ashley, if you would, please. So, we were making a permanent hay, and I have some Cornell tests I'm going to share later. Then we have legacy pastures. Here you can see some of the topography that I deal with. The young man that's operating that baler up there in the field, I had asked him to come do some baling for me. And when he came, I told him to come prepared with a 4-wheel drive tractor and to recognize that it's going to be steep. And he got there, and he's a young plain man. And he said to me, he said, "You didn't tell me it was going to be a cliff." And so we need to keep some of this ground in permanent hay. And I want to show you a little bit the difference that you would see with permanent hay and grazing. And here you can see, since we sold the dairy cows, we're just making hay. But even with a row crop situation, I think with aggressive covers, we can keep the soil health that you'd have under a continuous hay. Next slide, please, Ashley. So we are no longer milking cows, and so we've gone into a grain situation. And I think that this is allowing me more aggressive opportunities for rotation. We using small grains in our rotation now. And so I would share that was shared with me at Pennsylvania No-Till conference here about a year and a half ago, that 2 crops, corn, soybeans, or corn, alfalfa, is not a rotation. It's a reciprocal relationship, a lot like a milking machine would sound, just click, 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 click. You're just back and forth. To actually rotate, you need to have 3 points. And so a minimum of 3 crops would give you a rotation. Otherwise, you're just reciprocating back and forth. So I think this is really, really important. Not planting with the neonics, I think, has done a great job of increasing my soil life, and also changed from a straight commercial chemical type of fertilizer to trying to recognize that potentially those salts that Leland had mentioned may not be beneficial. And so I've gone to more alternative uses. I don't want to shill for any particular company, but if you've ever talked to Harold Schrock or Rod, you'd probably know a little bit about some alternative fertilizers that may be out there to use. Next slide, please, Ashley. So, we still do a little physical labor, and, part of a crop rotation means maybe having some permanent hay. On my steep topography, I have what I call, 10 and 12 acre waterways that are just areas that we need to keep in total hay to make sure that we get that. I want to talk a little bit, go ahead, Ashley, next slide, about living roots and how important they are. This is just a pictorial thing of chasing getting that cover crop in as quickly as possible following a harvest. something interesting to keep in mind is that those living roots are actually the engineers and the input manufacturers for our soil health. I've heard a statement, the most aggressive statement I've ever heard. I've heard numbers between 40 and 70, but up to 70% of the products of photosynthesis, if you will, the carbohydrates that are manufactured by that combination product that Leland also referenced earlier, can actually be exuded through the roots when the soil biome signals that they need it. Having and Leland showed those nice fibers of the mycorrhizae, the fungus, that highway can really do a good job of bringing in nutrients. The other thing that I've become accustomed to in the last several years is going away from starter fertilizer in the row. It's counterintuitive, but I think there's been some good work shown that if you supply copious amounts of phosphorus to that young seedling, it is happy, it's copacetic, everything is good, and it doesn't need to develop the relationships with its neighbors or with the other mycorrhizae, if you will. And so the relationship is not formed. And when that easily available phosphorus is used up, when the plant really wants to make grain and pull some phosphorus, the mycorrhizae are at the highway are not communicating and they're not able to deliver the extra phosphorus. But if you limit the amount of readily available phosphorus right next to that seed, then the communication and the back and forth would go. So it's amazing just to be able to consider how this creation communicates back and forth. And that's been a real eye opener to me about the living roots. Actually, you want to go to the next slide? Maybe spend a little time here. This is a photograph that I kind of enjoy. Basically, it's that nice legume fibrous rooted look. And this is an excellent opportunity just to see things. That living root. And it's also important maybe to consider that when we do cover crops, of course, a cereal rye crop by itself is better than nothing. And a fibrous rooted crop is the first rung on the ladder. As you start to climb into soil health, you definitely want to have a fibrous rooted crop. But if we can have combinations of species, legumes or brassicas or forbs also included that. Leland had that really nice photograph of a full plate of a nice carnivore diet there. We really want to have more than one food source. And so the root exudates from a fibrous rooted plant is the first rung, like I say, on the ladder. We want to start there. But as we climb, we want to maybe add species. And the farther along you get your soil health, the less necessary copious amounts of legumes will be. In fact, when you have a gigantic opportunity of soil health and you reach the zenith, legumes will play a very, very small part in your portfolio because the soil microbes will not need that injection of nitrogen. And we want to be careful that we don't have a carbon nitrogen ratio that would get out of whack and cause the soil to actually pull down some of the opportunity. Maybe the next slide here, and I recognize we're getting a little close on time here. We want to have a little bit of an opportunity. So this is just a showing of something I did try. I did interseed cowpeas with corn, and I like Leland pointing out shorter season corns. Some of you will remember this number. This was the old 535 Master's Choice white cob corn, 108 day, and I had red ripper cowpeas planted in here. We set the corn planter at 30,000 drop of the kernels for corn. It was in a row, Kinsey in a row planter. So the cowpeas came out as they came out. They were much higher because they were smaller. So we had them. One thing I would say is that a shorter season, something like a 90-day corn would have been better because as these cowpeas grew, they actually brought the corn down. I was waiting to chop it until the corn was mature for silage. And the cowpeas were a little too aggressive in this situation and actually brought it down. So if If someone wants to try something like this, I would recommend cowpeas over soybeans. I had tried soybeans in the row, mixed in the corn itself the year prior, and I was very disappointed with the NDFD 30 and the UNDF 240 numbers with that. I think that soybean was too lignified and the fiber was too hard, and so my fiber digestibility was not as great as I had hoped in the final process. I think cowpeas will do a better job, but one of the things we did recognize that even with an all crop head, there was a lot of bunching. And so an earlier maturing corn that would, if you're going to plant them the same time, we need to have that. Next slide, please. We're going to look at some of these Cornell samples. This is, I've done this for 4 years in a row now, and it's very interesting, these results. This has been in pasture for 30 plus years. So this would be what I would call a permanent pasture. Since we sold the cows a couple of years ago, we're making hay off of it, but we haven't done any renovating. The only thing we would have done to this would have been adding things like gypsum and some seeds with an Atchison drill in the past. You can see here the aggregate stability is still in the yellow, so it's not 100% green. My overall score here on this sod was an 87, which would be very high, but you can see the aggregate stability, even with a fibrous rooted crop for 30 years, is not as great as it could be. Next slide, please. Now this is row crop with covers for 30 plus years, and you can see here we've got this aggregate stability almost the same. This followed and I wrote the years there. It's a little scribbly. I don't have excellent penmanship, but in 2021, the crop on this field would have been corn. In 2022, that was corn for grain. We took that off for high moisture, and then we drilled wheat in for a grain crop, and that photograph of that combine you saw earlier was taking that off. And then after that wheat came off, we planted 7232 for silage, and we pulled that off, and then we planted barley. So you can see the aggregate stability there is pretty good at 57. Now let's go to the next slide. You can see this is the same farm, and it would have been a very similar rotation. There you see the corn in 21, and then the wheat crop, and I had half a box of beans left over, and I don't have a good idea what to do with a half a box of beans. My full season planting, I had over ordered my seed, and so there was a half a black box left, and so for about 12 acres, we put in the soybeans. But look at what that's just one crop of soybeans did on that same field, and we split the field. So this is not like different part of the farm. We dropped from in the high 50s to a 30. So here's an example of a straight legume crop pumping in lots of nitrogen, getting the carbon nitrogen ratio out of whack. And my supposition here is that the aggregate stability dropped because glomulin, or if you will, the glue that holds the soil's particles together, is a source of carbohydrate. And as the CN ratio is out of whack, we all know if we're carrying a bucket of water, or if we're carrying water in a bottle, wherever we tilt that bucket or that bottle, we know that the balance, the level is maintained. And I think that's a very good analogy for soil. Soil is going to maintain that level, and it's going to get back to a carbon nitrogen ratio that's correct. And so it will rob carbohydrates wherever it can find them to meet up with that nitrogen. And I think that's what you're seeing demonstrated on this. These particular tests are not inexpensive, and I'm certainly not doing every acre. I have 3 separate spots on the home farm that I'm in a study with, and then I have 2 fields on my second farm down the road that I've been using the Cornell tests on. So I'm doing regular soil tests every 3 years, but these are just annual tests, and they're much smaller pieces, and I think they can lead you to trend lines. And what I like about this health assay is that there's areas to read on it to improve if you want. And so not holding these up as paragon of virtue, you can see where I've actually done some damage trying to be frugal and use those beans. I've probably been better off to grind them up and feed them than I would have been to plant that second crop beans. They only averaged 30 bushels the acre. So financially, it was not a very good move. Next slide, please. And here's just an example. I participated with an NRCS study called Soil Your Undies, and these were brand new all cotton underwear that were buried for 60 days. And this is following that wheat crop. They were buried right after right as the wheat was growing in the spring, and then in the midsummer after wheat harvest, we pulled these out. It's a very interesting thing to see. Like I mentioned, that local group, we all participated, and there was like 25 of us farms, and we, all had them up on the board and had a chance to talk about it. You can see here that the single layer of cotton is completely consumed, but the seams and of course the elastic is not. And the next slide, please. And here's one of the head folks from Pennsylvania demonstrating this. I will be honest with you, want to make sure if you do a Soil Your Undies type of thing where you bury a brand new pair for 60 days, several inches deep, mark very well where you did it with a large pile of rocks or maybe some fluorescent tape or something that you can find it again. I was not present when the USDA folks planted these. They did it as part of a field day, and it took me about an hour and a half of grappling with a manure fork in that wheat stubble to find these underwear. We had almost given up. They had decided where it was, and I pushed it about 10 feet farther from the mark and finally found these underwear. So just a word of caution, learn from the mistakes that your King's AgriSeed regional coordinator makes. If you're going to do it, mark it very well. So in conclusion, I would just say, try new things. Don't be afraid. I know Leland and Rod set out really good paradigms for why and how. And I think that as you cover your territory and you're working with your customers, when they express an amount of dismay or they're frustrated enough with their paradigm of where they're at, that's when they're going to be making the change, at least how it's worked for me. I was sold on the winter forage, and I was frustrated with how I wasn't seeing the soil health attributes. And so I needed to change my way of approaching the problem to get better results. I would share that, I don't know, I didn't highlight it on these Cornell tests, but we went from in the 2.5 to 3%, organic matters are closer to 4 to 4.5 to 5 now. So I'm going to stop presenting. I know it's been almost an hour, and if anybody has questions, I'll turn it back to you, Ashley.
Great, thank you. Yes, if anyone has questions or comments, now is your time. You can hit unmute if you're on the Zoom, or if you dialed in on your cell phone or landline, you dial *6 or the *6. So this is your time to ask questions, or if you have any comments or personal experiences you want to share quickly, we'd love to hear from you.
A question on the yield max that Rod was talking about.
Okay.
He talked about several cuttings. Was he fertilizing those cuttings, or was he just relying on the different species to provide the nutrients?
Are you still on, Rod, that you can answer that question? He may have jumped off. I will try to get an answer for you on that, Jeff. Great question.
Yeah, Rod had a previous commitment. That's why he went first this morning, so he could make the presentation and then get to his next meeting.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there he is. All right.
I just had to figure out the unmuting part. So yes, you do need to fertilize that. One thing to note about legumes, when they're actively vegetatively growing, they fix nitrogen, but the plant uses that nitrogen itself. It does not shed nitrogen to other non-legume plants until it gets to a more mature state or until it's terminated. So yes, that crop needs to be fertilized. We usually recommend manure up front if it's a dairy, and then a little nitrogen fertilizer after the first cut. Not manure after the first cut. It does too much damage to the sorghum sudan.
Okay, thank you.
So does anybody have any thoughts on interseeding a cover crop mix into sweet corn fields?
This is Rod. I would think that it would work potentially even better in sweet corn because there's not as dense of a canopy and more opportunity for light to get down to that cover crop. Or the other thing is that, oftentimes sweet corn comes off earlier in the season and it might provide, a good opportunity for a diverse cover crop after that sweet corn's been harvested.
Yeah, also will reduce the mud that you're going to deal with in between the rows as you're harvesting. Even though it's a small crop, a little bit of green cover there is a great way to reduce tracking in all vegetables.
Well, and it would reduce any weed pressure that would come on late season after you start picking, was my thought process.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
I guess one question would be, what are you planning after the sweet corn? Is this the end of the season then, or you got another crop coming in? That might color what interseeding you use, but absolutely, it's going to work. It should work very well in sweet corn because there's a lot more light getting through that sweet corn canopy.
A lot of times after we get the sweet corn off, it kind of just sits. And so I thought by putting the cover crop in, that would give it more cover than just what's left of the corn stalks. And it would help with next year's weed pressure as well.
Yeah, and don't forget that setting up that next crop, Rod had that great thing with either the Raised Crazy Fall or the Maize Pro in his grain rotation, but anything we have for root exudates, that'll be pumping that microbes full of a full meal. And so the soil life will be ready to go rather than fasting all winter. Great job, Adam.
Any other questions? All right, well, if not, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks so much for taking time out of your morning to join us for this training. Mark your calendars for our next training on Tuesday, April 12th at 7:30 a.m. Join us as we talk about the summer annual lineup, best uses and applications, highlighting some of our favorite products as well. Be sure to keep those newly mailed 2022 data packets somewhere handy, as we'll be referring to that packet during our next call as well. So again, thanks for all that you do. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you to our presenters this morning. Take care, guys.